Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining the Dublin Chamber today. We are partnering with Stanford Healthcare Valley Care to bring a very important topic and discussion about stress. So as our economy is reopening and society is reopening, it seems to be there's some anxiety and stress going along with the unknown and what to do and how to manage things. So Stanford has wonderfully helped us find a speaker who can address stress and how to manage it. And her name is Winter Brown. And Winter has a PhD in political science from Duke University. She is also a certified yoga therapist. She's been with Stanford for 12 years. And she's a clinical instructor for physical and sports medicine. And she helps with all sorts of therapies: physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, something I can't read, and cancer. I think it's pediatric therapy. my scribbles. Anyway, she really helps the therapists meet the needs of the patients and find ways to help them heal. I would like to introduce, before Miss Winter starts the speech, we have Shelby Salonga, and she has been my main contact at Stanford Valley Care, and it's been wonderful to work with her. And if you want to say anything, Shelby, let me know.
I'm good. Looking forward to hearing the presentation. And thank you, Winter, for stepping forward to lead such an important topic.
Yes. Thank you. Winter, do you want to go around and introduce everybody, or do you think our pre-chatting did well?
I think our pre-chatting, I have a kind of a sense of where folks are at right now. And then I do want to invite any of you to, if you have a question, feel free to either wait until after the presentation or to ask me during the presentation. I really enjoy conversation and am very much happy to address any of the questions that you might have. So thank you very much for inviting me in and for joining me today. I agree that I think this is a very important topic. It can be challenging sometimes with transitions, whether it's transitioning to shutdowns or out of shutdowns, and how we can care for ourselves becomes of critical importance. So if it's okay with you, I'm going to share my screen. But I think I might need to be allowed. Let's try this again. Aha. All right. Oh, I know what I did. Hold on just one moment. That is not what I wanted to do. Okay. So you get the behind the scenes as I get my screen set up. Okay. So managing stress as society reopens. Before we start to kind of get into the meat of it, I wanted to take a moment just to invite you to kind of check in with where you're at right now. We've each kind of had different mornings, so it's always nice to kind of see where you're at. And if it's helpful to kind of check in with where you're at and your breath right now by closing your eyes, you're absolutely welcome to do that. You might focus your gaze on a still point in the space near you. But however it feels best to kind of work with your gaze, take a moment to turn your attention inwards and just notice how you're breathing and where your breath is right now. Notice how easily it feels to breathe. Maybe there's ease there or there's some effort there. You might notice where you feel your breath. Maybe you can feel it brushing past your nostrils, maybe past your lips, your throat, your chest, your stomach. One breath might be longer than the other. Just noticing that. So for a moment, keep watching the breath. There's nothing to do but just that. Watch the breath come in. Watch your breath go out. And then when you feel ready, start to come back towards kind of our space that we have together, right? And if your eyes are closed, you might reopen them. You might lift your gaze. And just for a moment, kind of maybe if you had any notes, anything that kind of arose, right, in terms of thoughts or sensations or kind of information about your breath, just kind of note that for what it is and where it is right now. And we're going to keep moving forward. So managing stress as we reopen. Today, I'd like to think about how we might talk about this and kind of look at it. And so I thought we'd look at kind of where we're at right now, right? Just in terms of vaccination rates, what's helpful, understanding a sense of how stress and anxiety actually work in our bodies, right? What happens when we start to feel stress or anxiety. Looking at some mind-body approaches to stress and anxiety, and then really trying to build that toolkit for resilience that helps us kind of work with what we might be experiencing at that moment. And as I mentioned, if you have any questions during this, feel free to ask them. I'm trying to think if I have access to the chat. I can't quite see chat when I'm sharing my screen, so I'm happy to have a verbal conversation with you all. Okay, so where are we right now? So looking at the vaccination rates in Dublin, and I focused on Dublin since that's kind of where the Chamber of Commerce is held. As of yesterday, 85% of Dublin's population of ages 12 and over have had at least one dose of the vaccination, which is a wonderful thing, right? And 71.9% are fully vaccinated. And that information comes from Alameda County. I included the link here just in case you want to look at it. They do a really wonderful job kind of breaking it down by zip code, demographics. So if you want more information, it is definitely there. But these are really great vaccination rates for Dublin because vaccinations really are the best way that we can be safe as a society and the best way we can be safe as an individual, right? So they might not be 100% effective in preventing COVID, right? There are some of those breakthrough infections that are happening even after vaccination. We know that they're incredibly effective in reducing the impact of COVID, right? So it's very unlikely if you're vaccinated, you're going to go to the hospital. And it's incredibly unlikely that if you're vaccinated, you might have, you might die from it, right? So what we're seeing with people who are vaccinated is that COVID is appearing in a much milder form, more like a cold, those kinds of smaller symptoms than something that really elevates and puts you in a risk category that requires hospitalization. And in the general population, 99% of hospitalizations and deaths are among people who are unvaccinated. So if we're really worried about, I know that there's a lot of conversation around vaccinations and a lot of personal reasons for why you may or may not vaccinate, but the science is there to suggest that it's a really effective way of protecting yourself and protecting other people. And I know there's been a kind of increased worry and concern about the new variants. There's been a lot of different research and kind of tracking around the different variants. Delta's fairly new, so some of that research is still coming out, but initial studies suggest that the vaccines are also highly effective against the variants. So again, just another way to protect yourself personally, protect your loved ones, protect your community, even as COVID is kind of mutating and shifting, right? So that's kind of where we're at now, just in terms of that global community perspective around vaccinations. And you know, when I start talking about vaccinations, you might have a response to that. So I wanted to take, again, just this moment to ask you to kind of check in and just see if you have a reaction or you have a response to learning this information. This information might feel really helpful. It might not feel helpful at all. It might increase worry. It might decrease worry. So just taking a moment to kind of see what this information, how it affects you. All right. And so you might check in back to your breath, your thoughts, feelings that are arising. Right. Now, part of the reason that I ask that question, right, when we deliver information, when we take a moment to receive that information and see what it feels like in our body, how it might affect us, is because that's partly how we want to start to monitor and become more self-aware of the things that start to act as stressors in our life, right? Or the things that might produce more or less anxiety for us. And each of us could have a very different response to the information around vaccinations, right? It might increase our sense of stress. It might increase our anxiety. It might have the opposite effect. It might have no effect at all, right? But those kinds of starting to kind of look at the different things that we're taking in, whether it's cognitively, right, what I'm telling you or somebody else is telling you, whether it's perhaps something else that's affecting our nervous system that might be much less conscious in our mind, right? Those can all start to shift how we respond and what our body starts to do, whether it starts to respond with stress, right, or anxiety. And both of these definitions come from the American Psychological Association, right? Stress being this emotional response like worry to an external trigger. Stress can actually be good for us. There's a whole form of stress, eustress, and stress, that kind of stress that's often associated with like learning a new skill, playing a piano, like learning a new instrument, learning music, language, right? Anything that's kind of novel and new for us can actually be really healthy, really good for us. The challenge is when stress becomes long-term or chronic, right? And I think, you know, the elephant in the room whenever I talk about chronic stress is I feel like is the pandemic, right? We've had about 18 months of a highly stressful situation in which things radically changed, right? And sometimes they changed in ways that were really helpful for us. Sometimes they were incredibly destabilizing. And our body is very adept at responding to stress when it's short-term, much less so when it's long-term and chronic, right? So knowing what causes our stress, what those external triggers are, can be really helpful in starting to manage those stresses, right? Anxiety is similar to stress, but it's a little bit bigger, right? It's those persistent excessive worries that don't go away even when a stressor isn't there, right? And I do want to say that if you're feeling anxiety, depression, stress, you're kind of feeling like you've been experiencing those responses for a while now and you need more tools for that, there are so many wonderful resources in the community through mental health, whether it's counseling or other resources that can help you gain more tools to manage that, right, for yourself. So these are very common experiences, and there's definitely resources and help and support for you out there. Okay. So what happens in our body when we experience stress or anxiety? Like I said, our body is very good at adapting and kind of noticing stress and responding to it, and especially on a short-term basis. We have our nervous system, and there's kind of two main branches in our nervous system. One is the sympathetic nervous system, and it causes this fight, flight, or freeze response, right? So when we see a stressor, and let's take something out of the pandemic. Let's say that a car is coming to us very quickly, right? And maybe we're stumbling into the street. Our nervous system, the sympathetic nervous system, is going to kick in very quickly to move us out of the way of that car, right? And you see this with deer too. Sometimes they get caught more in the freeze response, right? They see the headlights and they kind of get stuck. They have the same nervous system as us. We're mammals. And we all have this tendency, right? And some of us might be more predisposed to do one of these than the other. We might be really disposed to fight whatever's coming up, right? So there's that big deadline at work, or that, grant process, or something happening that's challenging at work and getting our stress response activated. Maybe we fight for it, right? And we're just really aggressive. We're really certain, confident, right? We're moving in there. We're going to get things done. And it's a very energized activity, right? To solve this problem and meet this goal. Some of us might have the exact opposite response, right? And that's kind of the procrastination or the running away from, or if I had this conversation with a colleague that I'm really not looking forward to, I might start avoiding that colleague, right? Rather than trying to confront the colleague. And that's the way that I'm managing my stress around that conversation, right? Or like I said, we might have this freeze response where we kind of just get stuck and we kind of hunker down a little bit. The great news for us is that there's another nervous system that works, and it acts as kind of the brake on our sympathetic nervous system, right? And this is our parasympathetic nervous system. This is the system that's really in charge of kind of healing, connection, and engagement, right? And for most of us, depending upon our histories and our own experiences, this is the nervous system we walk around the world in, right? It's the one that allows us to like meet a person and connect and really engage them if there's a problem to be solved. It's the nervous system that helps us collaborate with that person, right? We're really involved in solving problems through conversation, through collaborative action, creation. That's that nervous system, right? And it's also the nervous system that's in charge of sleep and digestion and healing, right? So when we think about especially long-term stress, the sympathetic nervous system, if it's continually moving, right, continually putting us in this fight, flight, freeze response, we might start to see effects in the parasympathetic, right? So we might see slowing down in the digestion. We might have more food cravings or less food cravings. We might eat more, we might eat less, right? We might start to see a real shift in our relationship to food and how we care for ourselves that way. When we're in that fight and flight and freeze response, there's a lot of energy that's produced, right, in order to shift us, right, to move us either towards the fight or away from that fight or to freeze us. So a lot of the energy kind of gets into the limbs, right? The heart starts pumping, the blood pressure increases. And again, that can be really challenging over a long period of time and have some effects on our overall well-being and health. So understanding kind of, for me, it's just always so helpful just to kind of have a sense, right, of what actually happens when we experience a stressful situation, right? And that there's kind of different cascading effects that might start to kind of permeate different other parts of your world, right? So you might also, if you're really feeling stressed or anxious, you might start to relate to your loved ones differently, right? You might feel more irritable. You might feel like you want to withdraw, right? And need a lot of time for yourself or isolate yourself. We all have different responses and different ways of trying to cope with things that stress us out, but they can really start to affect, right, us not only personally, physiologically, mentally, emotionally, but also our relationships with others. So as we think about this, you know, one of the questions that I have for you is, what is your response to stress or anxiety, right? And if you have a way to kind of jot things down, you're welcome to kind of take a moment and jot things down. If you already know kind of, oh, when I get stressed, I feel it in my shoulders, right? Or I feel it in my neck. Those are really common places we start to feel stress or anxiety. Anxiety can often, too, stress, both of them can present themselves as a thought, right? That keeps running through the head. We just keep kind of circling this problem or this thought because we're trying to resolve it. So maybe that's it. Or maybe you get irritable, right? Or you isolate, right? What is your response, right? Because it's so personal. Just taking a moment to kind of think through that. Okay. So if you need more time to kind of write that down, definitely take that time. I'm going to kind of keep moving forward a little bit in the presentation so we have time for conversation should we wish for it at the end. So as Inga mentioned, right, I come at this whole topic from kind of mind-body approaches, right? So I was trained in yoga, trained in mindfulness. That's where I kind of approach it. I do want to say I'm not a counselor. I'm not a licensed counselor or a family therapist. So that, there's certain aspects of this that are definitely not in my scope of practice, which is why if you do need more assistance, right, you feel like there's just a little bit more help that you could, or support that would be really helpful for you, I encourage you to seek out those resources in the community. But there's some really wonderful things happening with mind-body approaches. More and more research is being done around mind-body practices that are just showing so many different and wonderful ways in which it supports our well-being. And, right, if we're thinking about that nervous system of ours, if we're in that stress response, which is what both kind of comes on when we're both feeling stressed or anxious, right, then these are the practices that are going to help, again, turn that brake on, right? It's going to try to dampen down some of the stress response so that we can start to come back to that place where we can really be healing. We can heal ourselves, right? We can care for ourselves, and we can connect with other people. And I say mindfulness in daily life because I try to find ways in which we can integrate these things very easily into your own daily life, right? So it's not one other task you need to do in like the list of 1,000 things that you need to do for the day, right? If we can integrate it and make it more a part of each day, it's a lot easier and I think a lot more effective for us. So mindfulness, for those to whom it might be a new kind of concept, is just this practice of being really fully present with whatever's happening without judgment or expectation. And I do think that there's so many parts of that definition that appear simple, but are in practice really hard. We judge by nature, right? It's part of the way in which our brain and our mind kind of decides this is helpful, this is not helpful, right? I'm going to do this again, I'm not going to do this again. And so turning that part of our mind down, the volume down on that, can be a tricky part, but again, very supportive, right? And even expectation can be really tricky. So another way you might think about mindfulness is that it's this really kind and potentially loving attention, right? That it's embracing whatever we find ourselves in. So if I'm feeling anxious, rather than berating myself for feeling anxious, I might just say, wow, I'm feeling really anxious, right? What does that feel like in my body? How's my breath changed, right? And acknowledging that without necessarily trying to change it, right? And we might really want to change it, especially if we've been in that for a long time. But in general, we're trying to cultivate this relationship with ourselves that's free from expectation and free from judgment. Easier said than done for some of us. For me, I will put it that way. But I had mentioned there's some real benefits to mindfulness. So one study that's fairly recent has suggested that they were looking at people who practiced mindfulness before the pandemic and during the pandemic. And what they discovered is that mindfulness practices actually increased their resiliency during the pandemic. And our resiliency is really our ability to handle or navigate a challenging situation and even potentially grow from it, right? It's kind of the grit, and we all have it. The great news is that we can strengthen it. And according to the study, right, if we were doing that during the pandemic, there's a possibility that we would have felt less depressed or distressed. So there's, that correlation between anxiety, depression, and stress. So mindfulness supports our overall health, and it helps us reduce our anxiety. It helps us reduce potentially depression or stress. If the stress response system, that sympathetic nervous system, elevates the blood pressure, and by relationship our cholesterol, mindfulness helps us lower it, right? And that's a wonderful thing as well, unless of course your blood pressure is too low, but that's the conversation between you and your care provider. And we've also finding that it helps mitigate chronic pain. I thought this is also really interesting, given that we're talking to businesses, but mindfulness is good for business, right? So we see that companies who utilize mindfulness or encourage their employees to use mindfulness see increases in employee productivity, creativity, innovation. It strengthens employee resilience and their engagement in their companies, and it decreases employee stress, burnout, and as a consequence, right, employee turnover, which is really good. There's a lot of investment that you produce, right, that you create in your, you invest a lot in your employees. And so this becomes another way in which you could potentially support them, but also support your business, right, by retaining employees and also potentially increasing their engagement and productivity in your mission. So there's lots of good reasons to kind of explore this realm, not the least of which is it's really relevant to our topic, right? That it can help us manage stress and anxiety, which is why I keep coming back to it. So what are some things that we can do that are mindfulness-based practices that help us manage? We've already done a couple of these things together. We breathe, right? We're breathing all the time. It's the wonderful thing about our breath. It's for most of us, depending upon our histories, usually with us, right? And we might have a complicated relationship to that, just depending again upon our own histories, but our breath is here with us. And breathing can be a really wonderful and quick way, not only to become aware of what you're feeling, right? Oh, I'm feeling stressed right now. Oh, wow, I'm feeling really anxious right now. It's also one of the fastest ways that we can start to shift the nervous system, right? So I had mentioned that brake, the parasympathetic nervous system, right, acts as the brake on the sympathetic. The breathing, right, especially when we can take big, full breaths, or even better, maybe not big, full breaths, because sometimes that's really elusive. Maybe we might look for a breath where the exhalation is twice as long as the inhalation. That's going to stimulate that parasympathetic nervous system because of a whole different ways in which the nervous system is entwined with the parts of ourselves that help us breathe. We're going to stimulate that, and we can usually start to help kind of dampen down that stress response, right? And we might still feel stressed, right? It's not the cure-all to what's challenging us, but maybe we can approach it with that, not so reactively, right? And there's a study that suggests that 6 seconds, right, or roughly about 3 to 6 breaths, depending upon the length of your breath, is really all we need to shift our response just a little bit. So if I'm reacting to that angry customer or somebody who's just really feeling like they're coming at me and I'm starting to feel really angry in response, if I just take a moment to breathe for 6 seconds, it's possible that allows me just enough time to shift so that I approach that person, maybe not with that anger or frustration, right? With the irritation that maybe they're bringing to me, but in a way that, again, is more in accord with how I want to work with my customers, right? Which might be a little more calm, proactive about resolving the conflict, right? Seeking out collaborative or innovative solutions, right? Not always a guarantee, because sometimes we just get really amped up, and sometimes very rightly so, but that possibility of changing our response is there in the breath. The other thing that we've been doing together, I've been inviting you to do during our time together, is something I call NAP. It's just my acronym, which is to notice, right? What am I feeling right now? What happened this morning that might be affecting me right now? How did I respond to the news about the vaccinations? Maybe it was helpful, maybe it wasn't helpful. I'm going to notice, I'm going to acknowledge, and then maybe I can be present with what it is that is what is arising within me, right? So how does it feel if the information about the vaccine makes me feel more anxious or more stressed? Can I acknowledge that, be present with it for a breath or two without trying to shift it, right? And then what happens from there? Maybe nothing, maybe something. But again, there's that possibility that I get a little bit more of a toehold, right? A little bit more agency or a sense of control into what could otherwise feel like an uncontrolled response or an uncontrollable situation, right? That self-awareness can be so informative and so helpful, right? It's a good source of agency. Another thing we can do, there's a lot of good literature around this, is move our bodies, right? And that could be going out and exercising really hard, right? Gyms are reopening, which again might produce joy or might produce anxiety. Maybe you're hitting the sidewalks instead of the treadmills, but moving your body can be so helpful, right? Because as I mentioned, when we have that stress response, our body is primed for action. It's ready to move in order to get us into a place where we can be safe, right? And so if I have that response, but I'm at work and I can't leave work for a little while, ooh, that's a long time to be sitting with that energy in my body, right? And so maybe I take a quick 5-minute break and I just go walk around the block, right? Or I pace. Pacing happens frequently, right? For good reasons. We kind of automatically do that sometimes, depending upon where we're at. And it's a way of soothing, right? Of getting things out of our body. You could pace, right? There's lots of different modalities in which we can move our body. And it could be a little, it could be a lot. I would say if you're feeling a lot of stress, even a little might help you get some of it out, right? And the same with anxiety. The fourth is to connect with others. And when I say with others, what I really mean are like the people who just help you feel really good, right? We're like those people who just love you and you feel safe and you love being near them, right? Those people, because we see a lot, our nervous system reads a lot from the people that we're around. Right? So if I'm in a room full of really stressful and unhappy people, even if I'm not feeling that stress when I walk into that room, I might start to feel it because my nervous system is constantly kind of reading my environment and saying, oh, am I safe? Am I safe? And if it's kind of in this room with a bunch of people who are stressed and maybe irritable, it might start to go, oh, I'm not safe, right? And part of the way that it's seeing that or reading that is through tone of voice, facial expressions, right? We're really good at oftentimes reading other people or hearing other people and responding. And this again happens when it's the nervous system happening. There's actually a fancy term for it, nociception. It's kind of happening below the level of awareness, right? We might not be at all aware that it's happening in our bodies, but our own stress level might start to respond. Right. But that means the opposite is true. If I surround myself, and it's not always the case, right? Sometimes I can be very anxious and still be surrounded by my loved ones and not have that help me. But it might be the case that if I'm feeling stressed or a little bit anxious and I go and I have a good conversation with a friend and they're smiling at me, right? And there's a lot of care in their eyes and they're using a tone of voice that's very loving and soothing. My nervous system's going to go, I can feel better now and feel safe here, right? And again, it starts to put the brake on that stress response system. And then the other thing that we can use are our senses to really orient ourselves. And I think this is especially helpful when we start to move into that realm where we can start to feel really anxious. Because anxiety and especially stress can do this, but I think anxiety especially takes us out of that present moment, which is why mindfulness can be sometimes really helpful, right? And we start to think about the future, right? We're worrying about what might happen next, right? Or we're fretting about the past. And so coming out of that headspace where maybe we're really worrying about something, feeling really anxious, can be really challenging, but the body can really help us. And we have 5 senses that can really help us. So we could look at something in the room or something outside the room, really see that thing, right? And maybe notice, say, 3 things about that thing. So maybe you see a plant or a bird or even a part of the building outside your window, right? What are 3 things about this thing that I'm seeing that I could say to myself? Or I'm a big fan of smell, right? I love eating oranges, right? Because there's that tactile feeling of the orange, peeling the orange. So again, we're using our senses to feel the orange, to manipulate the orange, There's that burst of like citrus that comes out when you open the orange, right? When you eat the orange, there's that juicy part, right? And the texture of the fruit. And so we can even use the food that we have, right? The drinks that we have, cups of coffee, water, tea, whatever, right? To kind of, for a moment, drop in and experience this moment in time through our senses. And again, that can be very calming for the nervous system, right? Helping us shift out of a headspace and into our bodies, right? Where maybe we can feel a little more present. So those are some things that I use frequently. Part of the reason I wanted to bring them to you too is because, again, if we can find something in here that really like sparks your interest, hopefully, right? Maybe there's one thing. These are things we could potentially easily integrate into our day, right? So if I'm having a rough morning, I might take I'm a coffee drinker. I might take my cup of coffee and really hold the cup of coffee for a minute, right? And smell the coffee, because I love to smell coffee. Look at the coffee, you know, taste the coffee. And I can have this whole little mindful moment that potentially helps calm my system down. And it will take me 30 seconds, right? And it's something I do every day. I drink my coffee every day. But I can use it as an opportunity to really kind of connect with myself, be present with myself, be present with this moment, and again, calm the system down a little bit. So finding ways to integrate can be important. I did want to talk about too, like, how do we help out our mind? Sometimes it's the mind, right? It's those worries that start to come up that can be really hard to leave behind. So one tool we could think about is to say, okay, society is reopening. What is the worst case scenario? Right? Just for a moment, you know, you might think about that worst case scenario. Next, how likely is it to happen? Right? And that's where we have to be really judicious, right? Is it really likely going to happen, right? And we might use a scale of 1 to 5 or 1 to 10, 1 being the least. It's probably unlikely that's going to happen, right? But sometimes if this is a question that sets you off, right, into that realm, it doesn't feel supportive, right? It's starting to move you toward more stress, then skip this one, right? Maybe the other question that's better to ask yourself is, what feels most risky or unsafe about the situation I'm going into, right? So if gyms are reopening, and I haven't been to the gym in 18 months, and I'm feeling anxious about it, right? Or a little bit stressed about it. Okay, well, what exactly is it about the gym experience that I'm nervous about? Is it being indoors with people? Is it being maskless indoors with people? Is it the proximity to somebody I don't know very well? Is that it? Right. Once I can start to identify the things that feel really unsafe or more risky for me, then I can start to troubleshoot around what might help me feel safe. I might not get past being indoors, right? And so I'll just say, well, I want to still see my friends. I feel better about seeing my friends. I'm going to go for walks outside where it's in the open air. And that feels less risky to me, but I'm also meeting some needs, right? Or I'm okay being indoors if I'm wearing my mask. Great, put your mask on, right? Because then we can start to kind of plan. Once we know what exactly it is that might be making us feel unsafe, we can plan. And so maybe that's planning for more personal safety around masks or hand sanitizer. Maybe it's antibacterial wipes, right? Or maybe I'm not quite ready to eat in a crowded restaurant just yet, but I'm okay eating out on the patio. So I look for the restaurants that have patio seating, right? So we start to find ways that as things are starting to open, I can participate in that reopening in ways that feel like I still am in kind of control of the situation and feel good about that. Another thing we can do to help that is to make up a backup plan, right? So if I agree to meet my friend someplace and I arrive, what happens if I arrive and I find I'm all of a sudden not comfortable with this situation? What do I do then, right? So do I have a way of getting home? Do I text my friend and let them know, right? thinking through kind of backup plans. So maybe we don't meet here, but this is too busy here. We're going to go over here, right, where it's a little bit less busy. So figuring those things out. And it might be that, you know, once you kind of have a sense of what feels risky or unsafe, if a family member or a colleague or a friend suggests something that just goes, like, that doesn't feel good, you could suggest an alternative, right? So maybe, like I said, maybe I'm not ready to eat indoors, but I'm happy to eat with you out on the patio, right? And we start to find ways that we can kind of meet everybody's needs, but still feel safe. In general, right, what we want to remind our body and our nervous system of is this notion that you are safe, right? Because our body is so good at trying to protect us. Our nervous system is so good at trying to protect us. And then sometimes it just needs reminders, whether they're mindfulness or they're more rational, right? That I can still create safety for myself or for my loved ones and work in that way. So before we end, I wanted to do kind of one last exercise together, or mindfulness practice together. And so once more, I invite you to kind of get in a position that feels comfortable. So if you have been sitting for a while and you want to shift your position, you might wiggle, shift, move your body. You could stand, you could lay down. The beauty of Zoom is you have so much freedom around what you're doing in your space. And then notice whether you want to close your eyes or keep your eyes open. Now, some people, when they do mindfulness practices, they really like to have eyes closed. It's one less sense organ bringing in information for us to process. Other people, myself included, prefer to keep the eyes open, right? And that's when we find a place where we can rest the gaze and then soften the gaze around that. And if you don't know your preference, you might just explore a little bit. What does it feel like today, at this moment? Have the eyes closed or the eyes open? Okay. Now, when you feel ready, turn your attention to all the places where your body has found some support. And depending upon how you're positioned, there might be support underneath your feet, or your legs and hips. There might be support underneath your back or behind your back. Maybe you can feel something supporting your arms or your hands. And just noticing that support. Can you encourage yourself to grow a little heavier down into that support? And so you might imagine or feel that the muscles could start to soften, maybe even grow a little wider. Find your breath. Watch your breath come in. Watch your breath go out. As you're watching your breath, see if you can notice how it feels to breathe. What in your body shifts in response to the breath moving in and your breath moving out. Now, if you like, we could add to this. As you exhale, you could press feet or hands down into support. Feeling a little more activity in the muscles, a little more firmness in that support. And as you inhale, keep connection but lighten the effort. And exhaling, press the feet or the hands down into support. Really feel that support underneath them. And inhale, keep connection but lighten effort. And working in this way with your breath. Exhaling, pressing down into support. Inhaling, feeling a little more lightness. 3 more breaths. If thoughts come to mind, notice what you're thinking. When you feel ready, gently let them go. Come back to working with your breath. And when you feel ready, start to bring yourself back into your space. You might wiggle fingers, move your feet, move your body in any way that feels really welcoming. And then when you're ready, open your eyes or lift your gaze. And you might just notice what, if anything, you're feeling. Again, no expectation, judgment around what you may or may not find. I want to thank you for your time. Please let me know if I can be a resource for you. I have my email address here. I'm happy to help you in any way that I can. So I'm going to stop sharing. Come back here.
Hello, everybody.
All right. I see some conversations in the chat window. I'm sorry I didn't see them during it's so hard when I'm sharing my screen. I've yet to figure out how to share a screen and see the chat, but I see Patty's worry. You might be worried about the potential lockdown that might come. Yeah. That is hard to predict. I'm optimistic that this is a very personal, nothing at all related to Stanford, but I'm optimistic that they manage it on a county by county basis like they have. And Alameda County has good vaccination rates, so fingers crossed, right?
Definitely.
Yeah. Are there any questions or?
I needed that. This morning was
me too.
Was one of those that was sending me into a spiral. You come into the office, the phones aren't working.
Oh yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things.
And I needed to call Shelby. I got a deadline. So yeah, that was amazing. Does anybody want to pipe in, ask any questions? I mean, what are some recommendations or places you can go to learn more about mindfulness?
And great question. Yeah, there many of the, I will say, I think it's hard to find in-person mindfulness classes around. I know sometimes the libraries will have a meditation class that they put out. And so I would definitely encourage you to look at your Parks and Rec department. Sometimes there's great mindfulness or mind-body courses there. There's look at your library for resources as well. Sometimes there's some really great programs run through the libraries and the individual cities. Then there's, of course, like any of those mind-body practices, Tai Chi, Qigong, yoga. There are definitely areas in the Tri-Valley where studios and gyms are offering that. So those are all mindfulness-based practices. They also, move your body, so you kind of get the 2-for-1 of that. And what really, there's really great instructors in the area. And then I think probably where a lot of people turn to in the last year, there's a ton of apps out, mindfulness apps. So that space is getting really prolific in terms of opportunities and options. And, among those, there's different apps handle it differently. Some have some content that is free, and then you need to subscribe. Headspace is one of those. Calm might be another one. And Insight Timer is one that I enjoy.
One I use.
Yeah, and then I just learned too. I'm a big fan of Thich Nhat Hanh. He's a Zen Buddhist monk, and his village has put out a meditation app that I'm looking forward to exploring. And all that content is free. So
And what's his
there's
name?
lots of apps out there. Thich Nhat Hanh.
T-I...
THICH NHAT HAHN. Thich Nhat Hanh. Yeah, and the app is called Plum Village. It's named after his community. It's a mindfulness community and monastery. So that's a Plum Village meditation app that I think will be fun to explore.
Do you think he's on Insight?
He recommends Insight on his website, and I think.
Oh, I see him on there. Just search.
Yeah, is he on there? Yeah.
Yeah.
Insight. I love Insight because they have so many great teachers. So it's like I get to learn from people who've been doing it and teaching it for years in the United States. Jack Kornfield, Chan Salzberg, right? Lots of great teachers on Insight meditation, Insight timer.
Can I ask you just to weird off the okay, so the Arcturian healing frequencies always work to put me to sleep.
Nice.
Do they throw in like subliminal weirdness? You worry about that.
Yeah, I honestly don't know. But part of the reason that, from like a science kind of based perspective, part of the reason it might put you to sleep is we have this beautiful nerve in our body, the vagus nerve, and it's the main nerve of that nervous system, the parasympathetic nervous system. That's the brake, and it goes everywhere. It innervates our facial muscles, our eyes, our lips, our ears, runs down, goes past our vocal cords, into our lungs, the diaphragm, even down into the gut. It really wanders. But anyway, it has a relationship to the ear. So research on the vagus nerve shows or suggests that there are certain tones and pitches of music and sound that are very calming for the nervous system, right? So the vagus nerve hears this and it actually gets a little bit stronger. It's a way of strengthening the nerve. And it helps kind of downshift that nervous system. Just like you were mentioning leaf blowers earlier, right? There are other sounds that do the opposite, right? They make us feel less safe. I would put leaf blowers, tree chippers, jackhammers, a lot of construction sounds into those, right? And it kind of amps us up a little bit just because the pitch is either it's a lower pitch, a deeper pitch, and it's just striking our ear in a way that makes our nervous system think, I'm unsafe. Right. So they could be subliminal messages. I don't rightly know, but it's also possible they're just really good at choosing tones and pitches that are very calming and soothing. And so your nervous system just kind of goes,
Insight. Insight, is that what that is?
The meditation app?
Yeah.
Insight. Yep. Insight timer.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like this frequency 528 hertz and 432 hertz seem to be the popular ones for sleeping. But the Arcturian thing kind of threw me because I think I looked it up. Doesn't it mean like extraterrestrial?
I don't know. That's out of my bailiwick.
I don't know. But it puts you to sleep.
So it's actually sounds on that? Is that what?
Yeah. Yeah.
I love birds. Birds.
They have that.
Do they have birds? Oh, good.
Birds and water and
not woodpeckers, but
not woodpeckers. Or crows, right?
Yeah, or crows. But yeah.
It's like massage music.
Oh, okay. I might try that one.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that and a
sound
little
is
bit of
so
melatonin
powerful.
helps. Well, I got to get back to the yoga gym now. Do you teach yoga classes?
I do.
Where do you teach?
I teach at Dragonfly in Livermore.
Oh, okay. Wasn't there a dragonfly here in Dublin? Yeah.
Unfortunately, a lot of the yoga studios in the Tri-Valley did not weather the pandemic well. So
I think they merged with one of our members. Well,
with Well Studio. Yeah.
yeah.
So, and they have some really good offerings and good instructors.
So
yeah, Stacy's great.
got to get back into it.
Yeah, me too.
Just not the same at home because I tend to fall asleep.
Well, it's possible you just need to sleep too,
That's
right?
possible, yeah. Oh, the best yoga class is when it's dark and it's all done and you're doing that with Shavasana.
Yep.
It's the best.
It is. It can be really hard sometimes depending upon the mind, right?
Yeah.
But when you can really get into it and settle down, it's really nice.
Yep. So
yeah.
This was wonderful.
Sorry, go ahead.
Does anybody else have any questions?
Oh, they're so relaxed.
Good.
Did you guys fall asleep? Let your cares grow away. Well, wonderful, Miss Winter. Thank you so much. This has been wonderful. We will. I did record this, so we will post it to our YouTube channel for the chamber. So those who missed out can always tune back in and learn. It will be pushed out to our membership, so we look forward to maybe revisiting this again and again and again and again.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me in.
Thank you.
Thank
you everybody for tuning in. And thank you to Stanford Healthcare Valley Care for partnering with us on presenting this.
Bye-bye. Nice meeting you.
Bye.
Very nice.
So good to meet you. Thanks for joining, Patty.